Tetragrammaton.
Got to New York in 74, and in 77, I kind of made a breakthrough. But for about 10 years to 87, nothing. I mean, I had shows and I had artist friends.
Yeah.
And my
What was the
audience
What was that first breakthrough?
It was now they call it rephotography.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just simply me.
Do they call it rephotography or do you call it? Okay.
It was a very awkward term at the time because I was trying to figure out what I was doing.
Yeah.
And basically, I picked up a camera and I tried to play it as if it was an instrument because I didn't know anything about it. I had no clue about how to work a camera, but I thought, well, all my friends are picking up guitars and they don't know how to play the guitar, but they're going to CBGBs and within a week they got a gig. So maybe I could do the same thing with the camera. And I called it an electronic scissor, meaning if I looked at another image through the viewfinder, let's just say if I tore out a advertising image of a cowboy, like the Marlboro, and I push pinned it to the wall and then put my camera in front of it and looked through the lens and kind of cropped it. And two things would happen. I could look through the viewfinder at 10 in the morning and come back at 4 in the afternoon, and I would see basically the same thing. Nothing was changed. So the whole idea of the decisive moment, completely eradicated.
So then it's a new form of photography.
And the other thing was the idea of the electronic scissor. Instead of tearing the page out of the magazine and scotch taping or cutting it and pasting it and collaging, I made a real photograph.
Yeah.
It wasn't a collage anymore.
Yeah.
There were no scenes.
Yeah. And it was a new piece that didn't exist before.
And it was a real photograph.
Yeah.
So those two things happened, but it took a while because I didn't know what I was doing. So I started writing about it. But my audience at the time were just a few artists who kind of dug it and thought it was interesting.
Tell me how you felt about it at the time. Did you think it was interesting?
I thought it was new.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting because, well, the photography part of the art world completely rejected it. And I was also picking images that weren't necessarily aesthetically pleasing, advertising images.
Yeah.
Because I was working at Time Life magazine, and they published 7 magazines at the time, and when I would come in Mondays, there would always be a set of the new magazines. It's like I would be excited, and because I would go through the magazine and say, well, maybe there's a new Cowboy. Or maybe there's a new watch. Because my job was to tear up the magazines and give the editorial, which they call hard copies. And at the end of the day, all I was left with were these images of advertisements.
Yeah.
But nobody called for them.
Yeah.
And I kept looking at them thinking, well, there's no real author. Who's the author behind? These are art-directed images. They're very real. They have a virtuoso reality that's so real that it's unreal.
Yeah.
So it's something I didn't really need to think about, the meaning. They didn't really have. I just could organize them. Like, I think it was William Gibson, some sort of pattern recognition. And, I would notice, like, there was a lot of watch ads, a lot of pens, perfume. And so I would just start to rephotograph what was plentiful, what was always there.
Yeah.
I wasn't on a treasure hunt. It was just whatever was presented to me that week.
Did you call it rephotography right away, or did
Yeah,
it take time?
I
Right from the
did. But
beginning?
what's interesting too is that at first I was calling what I was doing pirating because I was very
You were aware.
aware
Yeah,
of what was going on with sampling.
yeah,
It had just started,
yeah.
but I thought I didn't really was comfortable with appropriation. That seemed a little academic. But I also ran into other artists who were also working with images. So that was important to me too, to become friends with other people that had that kind of sensibility of growing up at a particular time.
Do you think it's just the nature of the time and the place and the way information comes at you that other people see? They don't see what you see the way you see it, but they are looking at the same thing and then having their own interpretation of how to deal with this information.
Absolutely. I think we were the first generation to grow up with television. And, there was always television, magazine, movies. At least if you ask the artists that I came up with, they would probably say, have a very similar experience.
And if you think before television and magazines, there wasn't really a place for advertising.
Not really.
Advertising was a new thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it certainly was, for me, it was a conceptual thing too. How do you frame this particular type of thing, this product? And I was always interested in the concept of, like, for instance, the guy that presented the Cowboy to Marlboro was a guy named Leo Burnett. And in 1949, year I was born, this guy Lacombe, this photographer, did an essay on cowboys. And on the cover of Life that year, if you look at that cover, it looks like a Marlboro, kind of like a Marlboro guy. So that was in 49, and this guy, Leo Burnett, I think pitched the idea to Marlboro in 53. He wanted a more masculine deal. So all this was very conceptual, and I liked it. And I liked reading about the background of all
interesting.
this. It was kind of interesting to me because I was living inside of a giant novel in Time Life. The building itself became the incubator. It had its own hospital, cafeteria, bookstore.
Where was it?
And
Where is it
was
located?
right across from Radio City Musical.
Cool.
And I basically haunted that place, went to the archives. I would go and do research, But yeah, Time Life was my studio.
Amazing.
I mean, because I didn't have a studio.
No, but it's amazing, the resources and the information.
And I actually looked forward. I had a stupid job,
Yeah.
of course. It was just a bullshit job tying up the magazine. But I actually, I had to have something to pay I had a crappy little apartment in the East Village.
Yeah.
But I had to have something to pay the rent. But I actually didn't really mind going there because it kind of like, that's where it happened, really, for me. For some reason, there was this kind of thing going on where artists were documenting what they did in photographic and then narrative form. And they would be pasting it up on these pieces of cardboard and that's what they would show. And there was a gallery called John Gibson that was kind of dedicated to this way of working. And I really hung out at that gallery. I really was a pest, kind of do you need coffee? I mean, I would do anything. And I became friends with the wife's owner, and she tolerated my presence on Saturdays. And, Vito Acconci would show there, and Dennis Oppenheim. But then there were these other people, James Collins and Peter Hutchinson. And it was called, and they called it narrative art. But they used photography. They weren't photographers in that. So that was a kind of a stepping stone also. So I think the combination of that gallery and then the time life experience, I remember there were 4 advertisements in the New York Times magazine section that came out, I think, of living rooms, really dumb looking, generic.
Like from a Sears catalog, what would you'd see in a Sears catalog?
And
a model living room.
Like from a sitcom.
Yeah, nothing that anyone would ever actually live in.
But apparently that's what people did.
Hard to know.
And it wasn't like I looked at them as some sort of alien or sci-fi or social science fiction. I just thought, this isn't something that if I put this up at a gallery, I don't know if I'm going to get away with this. I don't know if people are going to because I don't know if I even liked it.
Yeah.
And I felt very uncomfortable. Yeah. And it kind of visually, it wasn't very inviting. It wasn't beautiful. But there was something that I needed to do. But what was my contribution? How was I transformatively? And that's where the camera came in. That's where the camera really surrounded the living room. When I looked through the lens, it was like absorbing.
Yeah, I was going to say the nature of photography also adds, you can call it a filter or
adds a truth.
Yeah. It's in music. Sometimes if you have equipment with tubes, it's more pleasant to listen to the sound through the tubes. And you could say it's more truthful, but in a way it's more colored. It's more beautiful than what the musician heard. The tube is doing its thing. And photography can do that. In films, you can see Technicolor. Obviously Technicolor is not what the world looks like. Right. It's beautiful.
Yeah. No, and that these images are highly art directed after the image is taken too, on all the prep work that goes in before they're published. But the idea of presenting these living rooms as a standalone photograph, which then I presented as normally as possible. Just like other photographers. Like I matted it, framed it, just
ordinary.
Very ordinary.
Yeah. It was the content that was radical.
And I remember when I first exhibited, people would look at them and they weren't quite sure, it wasn't even a question of, is this your photograph or who took, what is it? It's just like, what? And why? That's what I was that was the kind of reaction that I received, that I got, but I knew that was a reaction that no one else was getting from their work. And I felt that, maybe this is a little different.
Did your opinion of it change after you showed it? Did you have a deeper understanding of it when you showed it?
A little bit. I remember trying to, is there a way to make them more beautiful? I remember thinking about that. Because at first I was not only, the living rooms, there were always more than one. One you might not believe, but you have to believe that if there's 4 of them.
Yeah. 4 different living rooms, different furniture, different.
This does,
Yeah.
I was always trying to take the speculation out of the work, the idea of the guessing, the umpiring, the judgment. I was trying to take as much interpretation and put as much nonfiction into the work as I could. And the idea of making it into a real photograph, I believe, photographs you tend to believe a photograph.
Yeah, a photograph is nonfiction. But interesting, what you're photographing is sort of fiction. Sort of.
It was
It was
until I
real.
rephotographed
Yeah, but it was real. It was real furniture, but it was art directed in a way where it was not someone's living room, likely.
No.
It was likely a set.
Yeah.
But when you photographed it, then it became real.
Then it had this virtuoso reality to it. And I think at the time, what was in the air at the time, around 77, was this idea of like, what's real, what's not real? Yeah. That was the big question. Who do I believe in? Or what do I believe?
So much of today's life happens on the web. Squarespace is your home base for building your dream presence in an online world. Designing a website is easy, using one of Squarespace's best-in-class templates. With the built-in style kit, you can change fonts, imagery, margins, and menus, so your design will be perfectly tailored to your needs. Discover unbreakable creativity with Fluid Engine, a highly intuitive drag-and-drop editor. No coding or technical experience is required. Understand your site's performance with in-depth website analytics tools. Squarespace has everything you need to succeed online. Create a blog, monetize a newsletter, make a marketing portfolio, launch an online store. The Squarespace app helps you run your business from anywhere. Track inventory and connect with customers while you're on the go. Whether you're just starting out or already managing a successful brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create and customize a beautiful website. Visit squarespace.com/Tetra and get started today.
What else can you remember that was going on in 77?
Well, I mean, I thought the punk thing was...
Sex Pistols would have been 77.
Yeah, and I thought 77 was a year in which I thought a lot of things in the art world were beginning. You know, my generation was just starting with their, getting their chops together and just starting to have the opportunity to maybe form collectives and show each other what they were up to, and then maybe even showing publicly in alternative spaces. And I think the conceptual and the minimalists and the post-studio were kind of winding down. But I think back at any time during, at least in my experience, the art, there's always 3 or 4, maybe even 5 things going on at the same time. Different types of styles or different types of scenes. And, I belonged, for lack of a term, they call us the picture generation, and I sort of was hanging around with that crowd.
Who else was in that group?
Well, people like Cindy Sherman, people like Troy Brontak, Robert Longo. Jack Goldstein was a very important. He was a little older than us, but he was a guy named James Welling. Barbara Kruger was a really good friend of mine at the time. And I'm not sure what happens now in the art world, but I don't know if people get together. But it's one of the things that I remember. I mean, luck has a lot to do with all of this, but I think I was very lucky because when I came to New York, in 74, I came for like the idea of staying for 3 months, and it just turned into like forever. I just kept staying.
With the idea of becoming a fine artist?
Well, I was already making work, very traditional.
Tell me before that, like, how did you come to the idea of this is what you want to do as a kid?
I was always interested in making art, drawing as a child. Like when people say, people can play the piano by ear, I think they call it. I was able to draw. I could sit down with a pencil and draw a portrait of my grandfather or my sister or whoever was around, and I could make it look like without any.
Yeah.
I could do that when I was like 9.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like something natural.
Yeah.
It was easy. I mean, I never really thought about it.
Yeah.
I never had to.
Yeah.
Never even gave it a second thought. But I got, really sidetracked into wanting to become a musician. I mean, that was my first.
Do you play an instrument?
I do. I have over the years played in little, bands. I mean, every artist. We were all in bands and everything like that.
What instrument do you play?
I play a little piano and a little guitar. It always seemed with the music thing, I didn't like the idea of performing or being, having to do it in public. The idea of collaboration wasn't a big thing with me. And the idea of acting or, having that kind of shtick on stage, it never, appealed to me. And I'd always thought I'd hit a wall. I always hit a wall with the even the idea of playing the guitar. I could only go so far. With the art, there's never been a problem with that. There's never been a stop. Things just come out of that, and they still do.
It's great.
It's very strange how they all. And I go back.
So you might go back to rephotographing.
I rephotograph. I still rephotograph. I still occasionally. I'm trying to make a new cowboy type of image.
Great.
I've never given up on the jokes. The jokes are just endless subject matter.
Tell me the story of the jokes. How did it start?
I wanted to draw again. This is like 85. I moved into a house with musicians. They were friends of mine, and they were trying to make music.
Yeah.
But I wanted to draw again because I had given up drawing. I'd given up anything with associated with the hand. I had read things that always not associated with anything with the hand anymore. And I kind of said, well, maybe I'll turn that around. So I decided I wanted to draw. But what do you draw? That's the thing. For me, subject matter is first, interpretation or how to do it is second. So going through all these magazines, I always loved the cartoons. Whether it was in Playboy, New Yorker, Easy Rider had some really great cartoons. And I said, I'm going to draw something that's already been drawn. Again, I didn't want to make things up.
Yeah.
I had this idea. I didn't want to.
You were like documenting something that's already in the world.
I didn't want to I didn't want it to start with me.
Yeah.
I wanted to
Do you know what it is about that? It's interesting.
Because I wanted it to be believed.
Yeah.
I want to believe what I look at. And I wanted people to believe what they looked at when they were looking at what I did.
Yeah.
But if it came from me, like if I said, oh, I dreamt this, why would anyone believe that?
Yeah.
I was interested in the truth.
Yeah.
So again, if I could just take as much interpretation out of it, and like the idea of the critic or the judge or the umpire weighing in.
Yeah.
I didn't need that. I didn't want that. Subjectivity was something I wasn't interested in. It had always been associated with art.
Yeah.
I wanted to go beyond that. So the idea of drawing something that was already drawn, cartoons are drawn. So I just redrew my favorite. This guy named Whitney Darrow was one of my favorite cartoonists. So I redrew it. But I knew what to do and how to do it because craft, unfortunately, it makes it easier if you know a little bit about the craft. And I knew, you could spend years in an art supply store just picking out paper.
Yeah.
But I knew what paper to use.
Yeah.
I knew what hot press starch was. I knew a number 4B pencil. I knew exactly what to use right away, and I could just do it that day.
Yeah, so very little experimentation.
So I just redrew the cartoon. And
Did you draw it scale, same size?
About this big.
Uh-huh. And the original was smaller?
Yes, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a spot-on reproduction, but it was hand-drawn.
Yeah.
Even the punchline.
Yeah.
And I started but the thing was, I called them jokes.
But they were comics.
They were cartoons, yeah. And I realized after a while, so I would send, and it was funny, I sent these cartoons to this guy in Chicago, and lo and behold, I would get a check in the mail for $3,500. Astounding to me. Because none of my art ever sold. And these were the very first things.
Is that true?
Yeah.
So up until this point, nothing sold?
I mean, nothing. The Cowboys, when they were first shown, nothing.
Nothing.
Ever.
Yeah.
None of the photographs that were shown. So I sent them to this guy, Hudson, who had a gallery in Chicago. And he didn't have a show. He just sold them. And I said, this is great. This is unbelievable.
Were you operating under the assumption that nothing would ever sell at that point?
Oh, of course, yeah. I
was
trying to find jobs.
How many years has it been?
It had been like since 1970, 71. I was making drawings. But long story short, I was calling them jokes, and I realized it's not a joke.
Yeah.
If I wanted a joke,
and
again, this is what happens.
Yeah.
I said to myself, I've got to drop the image and just concentrate on the punchline.
Yeah, because you're calling them jokes.
Yeah.
You also could have gone the other way and decided to call them cartoons, but you didn't do that.
And then I had this.
Did you feel like the fact that you were calling them jokes was like a clue?
Was wrong.
It also was like an arrow.
It was, and the arrow hit. So 85 turns into 86. I was invited back to the ICP, International Center for Photography, to give a lecture on my
photography.
I
thought they don't like you.
Yeah. And I get there, and there's a fucking line around the block. I'm thinking there's going to be, 5 to 6 people.
Yeah.
And what I don't realize is that apparently, of course I'd had shows in New York, but there was a little bit of a underground audience for the work.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about maybe 8 years into this practice that people wanted to find out more. And of course and it was organized by a very good friend of mine, Marvin Heiferman, who was the first guy to show the photographs. And of course I have a panic attack and I can hardly go in.
Yeah.
I mean, I just flipped out.
Yeah.
And I had subletted my apartment. I go back to my apartment. I get a call from this gallerist wanting to come over for a studio visit. And I said to the woman, I said, well, I don't have a studio, but I'd love to come to your gallery.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, I move in. I move into the gallery.
Wow.
They have a back room, which I took over.
Yeah.
And I started buying joke magazines. And I remember going to the Strand, and I'd go to the humor section. Mm-hmm. I started checking out all these jokes.
And it was important that you would never write a joke.
No, not at that point.
It had to be
found
material.
Yeah.
And did you have to like the joke, or was it something else?
The joke in the end had to be, it was a way of, for me, it was a way of surviving. It was serious. It was the way they were written, too. Jokes are very strange sentences, the way they're, like...
The structure of the sentence.
The structure of the sentence is very different from other sentences.
Yeah.
Like, my father was always drinking. He saw a sign that says, "Drink Canada Dry." So he went up there.
Yeah.
That's the
Pro
joke.
Canada
And that's a
Dry. Yeah.
very weird sentence.
Awkward.
Awkward.
Yeah.
And I was very much into comedians too.
Yeah.
I think they're really kind of important. There's no doubt in my mind, at least for me, they were important.
me too.
In my, you know,
Who were your favorites?
well, I mean, you know, Lenny Bruce, obviously, Richard Pryor, Dick Gregory was a big, you know, I just found that Bob Newhart 1959 album, The Button
Button Down
Down,
Mind.
which became a huge.
Yeah. Had a good comeback.
But, you know, I loved all the comedians I used to watch as a kid on Ed Sullivan, you know, Jackie Carter, Jackie Vernon.
Mm-hmm.
I loved all the Borscht Belt. You know, Rodney Dangerfield is perhaps maybe the biggest comedian for me. I mean, George Carlin's a genius,
Yeah.
you know, but
Rodney's special.
Rodney's very special. I managed finally, after about 10 years negotiating with his wife, to buy his archive.
Oh, amazing.
And it's, you know, I bought Milton Berle at an estate sale, his archive. I managed to buy all his jokes were written on these card files, and they're organized by subject.
Yeah, great.
When you asked me about the straight arrow,
Yes.
because to me, the joke was like the rephotography for me. And I never thought I'd make another breakthrough.
Yeah.
But, you know, the cartoons were okay. You know, it was, the idea of redrawing something that was already drawn. But when I got to New York and I never went back to California. I just left all my stuff and I moved into this gallery. And she gave me this back room as a studio because I didn't have a studio. I said, how do I deal with the jokes? And so I decided first to write them by hand, because again, I wasn't associated. I would write them in my own handwriting.
Mm-hmm.
And I would pick jokes that were fairly autobiographical. So it was sort of like self-portrait.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. It was a very simple idea.
Mm-hmm. Jokes that related to you or your life.
It's like I should have written that joke.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
Yeah.
I don't have to. It's already been written.
Yeah.
I'll write it again.
Yeah.
And I'll put it on an 11 by 14 coated stock. I went down to this warehouse on Broadway, just spent days looking for the right piece of paper. Ended up with this 11 by 14 coated stock. And I wrote out, the first joke was, I went to a psychiatrist. He said, tell me everything I did, so he's doing my act. And I didn't get it. I just, but like, where do I locate myself in that joke? Am I the psychiatrist? Am I the patient?
Yeah.
And the idea of
what's
doing
your act?
And doing my act.
Of course.
And what is my act at this point?
Exactly.
And it was the perfect joke. What is my act?
Yeah.
And I realized I don't have an act. So what is this? So what is the psychiatrist even talking about? Doing my, now he's doing my act?
Yeah.
I have, so I have an act?
Yeah.
So anyway, I write it out and I pinned it to the wall and I said to myself, can I do this?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah.
It's not getting away with it. Can I invite someone up and say, this is my work?
Yes.
This little, very modest.
Yes.
$10.
Yes.
That's the price that I put on the joke, the very first ones.
Yeah.
The human foot is a true marvel of engineering. With 26 bones, 33 joints, and over 100 muscles and tendons, it's built for flexibility, balance, and natural movement. Unfortunately, today's narrow, rigid, elevated shoes undermine this natural brilliance and weaken your feet. Vivo Barefoot shoes set your feet free. Feel every step. Move naturally. Allow your feet to function as nature intended with Vivo Barefoot. Thin, flexible soles to keep you connected to the ground. Wide toe boxes to let your toes spread and stabilize. Minimalist shoes designed to mimic the barefoot experience. Whether you're running, hiking, or just going about your day, Vivo Barefoot has you covered precisely when and where you need it most. Feel the vibration of the earth. Strengthen your feet. Improve your posture. Enhance your natural movement with Vivo Barefoot. Made from 100% recycled and natural materials, they are as healthy for the planet as they are for you. Experience the freedom of barefoot movement with the protection from the sharp edges of a man-made world. Natural movement for your feet, sustainable choices for our world. Learn more at vivobarefoot.com/tetra and embrace your human nature.
So the jokes were the first thing that sold. You said the guy in Chicago sold.
Sold, yeah. And then I stayed in New York. At the time, I was looking for any job I could support myself with. And I knew I wasn't going to, make it with the jokes, but I felt that I had to do this. It was funny. The feeling I had was if I had walked into a gallery and I had seen someone put handwritten jokes up on a wall and called them their art, I would have been jealous.
Yeah.
And when I have that feeling, I know that's where the arrow should be pointing.
Yeah.
I said, well, wait a minute. I don't have to be jealous. I'm the one who's doing it.
It actually happened.
And it happened very organically. It didn't happen overnight, obviously.
No.
It happened because I was, drawing and miscalling the cartoons jokes. And also I had never seen this kind of subject matter or even the radicality of the funneling of the information down to this little piece of paper.
Yeah.
But yet the tell me everything. That joke.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you everything.
Yeah.
And I just sort of started ripping with the idea of the joke, and it just became, okay, let's paint. And another artist, of course, would have maybe done something very crazy in terms of materials and how it was presented. My idea was that the subject matter was radical. I didn't need to radicalize how it was presented.
You presented it in an ordinary way.
So I decided, what's more ordinary than stretchers, canvas, and paint?
Yeah.
Completely everyday. And then I decided to learn how to silkscreen, because silkscreen at that point was a dead medium. Warhol had exhausted it.
Mm-hmm.
I was a huge fan, of course, of Warhol, but he had exhausted it. There was only one silk screening company left in New York that was on Varick Street, and there were no more silk screen inks because they were outlawed because they were so toxic. So the only silk screen ink were hobby inks, which when you used them, they would fade away in 3 months. They would disappear. And of course, that's what happened to some of my jokes.
Wow.
When you talk about collectors,
Yeah.
I had a collector call me up 3 months after he bought one of my jokes and said, Richard, the joke has disappeared. And I said, well, I'll give you an option. And it's funny, this guy was Albert Brooks's brother, the comedian's brother. And actually, he was one of the funniest, and he ran an ad agency. And he was one of the funniest guys I'd never met Albert Brooks, but his brother was a big-time Los Angeles collector. Calls me up, jokes disappeared, it's a ghost. And I said, well, tell you what, I'll buy it back. But there are only 4 of those. And I said, I used magic ink, disappearing ink. I completely bullshit that they were supposed to do this. But I said, don't worry. I'll buy it back because there's only 4.
Yeah.
Of course, that's what collectors want to hear.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's like the stamp that's printed upside down. It's
I was doing my
It's
act.
more collectible.
Yeah, exactly. I was doing my act
Yeah.
on the phone.
It's a question I had for you. If you had a choice of buying a Monet signed by Monet or a Monet signed by Picasso, which one do you want?
Yeah, I'm probably the one by Picasso.
Me too.
I think, you're getting, especially if it's an homage. Yeah, it's an interesting question. But yeah, I agree. I don't want to buy Picasso.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, I know you've published well-known books
Oh, yeah.
that you have authored.
Catcher in the Rye.
Catcher in the Rye, written by Richard Prince.
Yeah. And, it's funny, that book, we took it to a number of printing presses.
They wouldn't do it.
I wouldn't touch it. It was very, very
Litigious.
Yes, exactly. So I think it was published finally in China. I'm not sure. A really good friend of mine, John McQuinney, who has since passed away, he was a bookseller. He operated in what I call the gray area, meaning he sold first editions and he sold art that had a little to do with book art. He was trying to marry the two when he unfortunately passed away, but he was the guy who got that off the ground and saw that. And when we got the feel of that book, when you pick it up, I mean, I'm a bibliophile, which I guess, I like books more than people. I guess that's the definition.
Yeah.
And when we got the book back from when it was first published, I could feel the weight, the paper, the dust jacket, everything was perfect. I'm trying to think what was different about. I think the only thing that was different was I doubled the price of what a normal Catcher in the Rye would sell for at Barnes & Noble. That's what was different about the book. And other than that,
Yeah.
it's this, except it says Richard Prince,
Is it only on the cover or inside too? Like on the page,
I
the
think it's
author's page?
I think it's Richard. I think it's Richard Prince.
Yeah.
I think we on the back of the first edition of a real Catcher in the Rye is the image of Salinger. He hated that image and had it removed, so we didn't publish it either. But it's funny. Getting back to Dangerfield, I sold that book outside of Dangerfield's on a blanket. I have pictures.
That's so
and I think
funny.
Chris Rock is in the window looking out.
Amazing.
His poster or something like that.
Amazing.
There was a park bench in Central Park where I would go and sell these types of certain situations, and it would get around town that, oh, he's there, and people would. I did that recently with Ted Kaczynski's book. I managed to buy the only copy of his biography that he wanted published, but his brother stopped it. So the manuscript became available to me. I don't know how, but I bought it, called Truth versus Lies or something. Anyway, we published it. I didn't ask permission, or we just did it. And the same thing never got in trouble with Catcher. To this day, there's been no repercussions with the Kaczynski. Lots of trouble, though, subsequently with the problem with this idea of taking things that are out in public first, where you see them out there. And I feel like they have the idea of something that's already been seen by other people other than myself.
It's already in the public.
That I need, for some reason I need that. I don't know why, in terms of my subject matter.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it can make a connection, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Maybe it's some sort of deniability, because the content's not coming from you. You're the author of the work, but you can't take responsibility for the thing that's underneath Do you know what I mean? It's like if you took a picture of a person and that person goes out and kills somebody, that has nothing to do with you. You took the picture of it.
Yeah.
You're a step removed from it.
Yeah. Well, the idea of taking a picture of someone, I actually in the mid 80s, I had an idea of how to take your portrait. And it was basically, you would give me 5 pictures of yourself that you liked
Yeah.
and give them to me.
Yeah.
I would look at them and I would pick one. I would rephotograph it, and that would be your portrait.
Done by you.
By
Perfect.
me. And I felt, 2 things happened there. Well, a couple of things.
Everybody's happy with that arrangement. That's a great arrangement.
You don't have to come and sit for me.
Yeah.
You're not going to be disappointed.
No, you really like all 5.
You like all 5.
Great.
And there's a kind of a time warp. You could give me a picture when you were 14 years old.
It's a great idea.
Avedon can't do that.
It's a great idea.
Now, I thought when I wasn't making any money, and this was 84, this is actually how I was working with Aeroff. That's how I got to the archive because then I started going through the archive of Warner Brothers, and I did Dee Dee Ramone, I did the B-52s, I did Laurie Anderson, I did David Byrne, Brian Eno, whoever was on the label.
Yeah.
But I had permission, and they owned the car. I wouldn't get in any trouble with that. But I actually thought this could be a business, but it
Still can.
I'm very bad at business, but it didn't work out, and unfortunately. But it was I thought it was an interesting way to take someone's portrait. There's a bunch of them that are out floating around in the ether out there from 84. But the other weird thing in photography that I did, which no other photographer had done, I made editions of 2.
Why 2?
Because it was still a reproduction. Not much of a reproduction, but because the natural...
Most photographers do 250
or 50.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember Mapplethorpe. We had become friends before he passed away. He was always complaining to me about, I said, well, Robert, I mean, first of all, you make a lot of photographs, but you make big editions. He says, yeah, why do you only make 2? And I said, well, I started that with the Cowboys, even though it didn't sell, but I kind of knew the idea of 2 was a great, it was also a kind of way of, not subverting, but kind of like dealing with the photography's naturalness. The camera has a lot of, things that just go along, whether it's retouching.
Yeah.
I would always use a commercial lab, and they all had their own way of describing the process, and I would use those terms sometimes to describe the work.
Yeah.
Because it was real.
Yeah, it was technical.
I didn't want to make anything up.
Yeah.
Or at least my way of making things up was different. That's all.
Yeah. The idea of 2 is really interesting. And it also elevates photography through scarcity. Mm-hmm. Do you know, like, when you can make as many as you want, it can't be worth as many as if there's only 2.
I remember buying a George Tice photograph, and it was like the 250th copy of this particular image. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like, and most of my what I would call straight photographer friends, not that I had that many, but they would have huge editions. And I mean, I don't mind, that's their business.
Yeah, you're doing a different model.
Yeah. I mean, it just had to be. I just thought it was kind of cool in 1980 when I started the Cowboys. I had been doing editions of 10, but then I realized, well, none of them were selling. So what was the point? But so then I said, well, let's try 2. Maybe again, the scarcity would help.
LMNT Element Electrolytes. Have you ever felt dehydrated after an intense workout or a long day in the sun? Do you want to maximize your endurance and feel your best? Add LMNT Electrolytes to your daily routine. Perform better and sleep deeper. Improve your cognitive function. Experience an increase in steady energy with fewer headaches and fewer muscle cramps. LMNT Electrolytes. Drink it in the sauna. Refreshing flavors include grapefruit, citrus, watermelon, and chocolate salt. Formulated with the perfect balance of sodium, potassium, and magnesium to keep you hydrated and energized throughout the day. These minerals help conduct the electricity that powers your nervous system so you can perform at your very best. LMNT Electrolytes are sugar-free, keto-friendly, and great tasting. Minerals are the stuff of life. So visit drinklmnt.com/tetra and stay salty with LMNT Electrolytes. LMNT.
Back to the jokes. It started with you did it by hand, and then it turned into silk screen, and then is that the end of it?
No, then it became stenciling, painting, and then I started reintroducing the cartoon on top of the joke. And I would put a joke that had nothing to do with the cartoon.
I see.
So the cartoon, I would pick, there are certain situations that cartoonists use all the time. And one of them was a woman walking in on an infidelity. That's a standard. So what I would do is I would put that as the cartoon, but the joke underneath had nothing to do with the situation. So you would read the text and say, it didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So I would do that.
Yeah.
That's how I reintroduced the cartoons.
Really interesting.
So
Really interesting.
I did that for a while. Then I did some abstract paintings and put a panel, attached a panel under the abstraction, and hand wrote a joke. Didn't silkscreen, I just wrote it out again. Did that for a while. So 87 is when the galleries came knocking, because they realized, wow, this guy's got maybe like 10, I mean, I know what their motivation was, backlog. And, you know, there was an article in one of the art magazines published an article. So the phone started ringing because of this one article. I was completely like dumbfounded, you know. So people started visiting me in that little room.
Yeah.
And anyway, gallery came, made me an offer. I went with the gallery, and it's funny, our first show, I didn't tell her anything about the joke paintings. She thought she was getting photography. And when I brought the work to the first show, she says, "What are these?" I said, "Well, this is my new work."
This is the new work, yeah.
She says, "Well, where are the photographs?" I said, "Well, I'm not doing photographs." So there was a bit of a...
That's great.
There was a bit of a an impasse there.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we had settled on, in those days, what they called a stipend, which is, I don't know if they have those anymore, but you would get a certain amount of money every month, supposedly against sales. Kind of like what they do with
music business as well.
Business.
Yeah.
And so she was a little surprised. "Here, I'm giving you this stipend. And what am I supposed to do with these, by the way?" I said, "Well, they're jokes."
Yeah.
And I like that idea that if anything else, I started doing an act. I said, you know, I would tell people would say, you know, "I like that joke," or "I like this work." I would kind of like say, "Well, what do you like, the painting or you like the joke?" You know, I would like start to kind of mess with people.
Yeah.
And like really like, because the other thing that would happen is you'd walk into a guy and people would be laughing, which didn't really happen in most shows. So a lot of weird things happened because of the subject.
Yeah.
You know? And of course, then in Europe, where if you couldn't
The language.
speak,
Yeah.
you know, it would be the abstract. I would say, well, it's abstract. It's abstract art. It's perfect. You can just look at it. And because I started to, when I started silkscreen, I started to pick two strange colors. One background, and then the joke would be silkscreen with a very strange, and I felt that the color was the cartoon, was a substitute for this, you know, it was representational. So the colors became very important. And after a while, I did this thing where I would only work with like 18 jokes, like a routine. You know? I mean, I was really...
That was your act.
That was really...
Yeah. Would you
thinking
do
about these
multiple
things.
of the 18 or no? Only 18 and...
I would do it, yeah, but different scale. Sometimes it would be small. Sometimes the same joke, like the psychiatrist joke, was done a lot over the years.
Yeah.
But in different ways. And
Yeah. Because that's like one of your hit songs, that joke.
that's like the hit song. Exactly. Yeah. But I wouldn't have a hit song until, to tell you the truth, I've never, even though I was very lucky in the sense that, you know, it's not as if I haven't had museum shows and all that, which is, you know, it's okay. I mean, I'm not a big fan of being curated, but in talking about a hit show, I didn't have a hit show until I did, I don't know if you're familiar with the Instagram portraits.
I am.
That was the first show that was, I felt, broke out outside the art world.
Wow.
And that was a new territory and new things to deal with, which I hadn't ever dealt with before. I'd always been inside world.
Yeah.
You know, just 25 people were my audience, I felt, you know. I was never expecting to make art that would be on the news. Like, that was preposterous. That's not something that I would want or even, you know, it just never occurred to me. But
well, it's not realistic.
no, it's not. And you can't plan that.
No.
You can't. You know, you could try. I mean, a lot of artists probably try, but, you know, anyway, that just happens. And I didn't even, at the time when I did the Instagram portraits, I was on Instagram for the first time. Because
Instagram was probably pretty new, right?
it was 2014. It had been a little while.
A couple of years?
But I was on my, I was on my daughter's, what they call Tumblr. I don't even know if that was, I wasn't really into the social thing. But I was specifically told by my kids, don't go on Instagram. And I didn't ask why. I just said, don't. It's not for you. So that's interesting. So I went on it.
Of course.
And then
That was the only invitation
it was
you needed.
like a brand new giant magazine.
Yeah.
I went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And they lost me for a summer.
Yeah.
I see why they told me not to go on. Yeah. It was like...
It's just too addictive?
And so it was like, again, having this thing in your room, too. I always liked the idea of, could I make art in my bedroom by myself?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just something simple. But I was on the phone one day with this woman, and I was talking to her, and I said, you know, she was a model, Jessica something. Anyway, I was going through her feed, and of course, everybody's posting lots of pictures of themselves. So I'm getting to look at not just 5 pictures that you like of yourself. Some of these people were posting like hundreds of pictures of themselves. So I was going through her feed, and I said, Jessica, there's an image of you. It looks like you're somewhere in Switzerland. You're standing in front of a Brigitte Bardot, Andy Warhol portrait in your ski outfit. And I said, it's a fabulous. I don't know who. I didn't care who took it. I don't pay any attention to who takes photographs.
Of course.
I said, this is an amazing photograph. You should, make a portrait of this. And she simply said, why don't you make a portrait? And then it clicked. Of course I should make a portrait of it. And that's how it started.
Amazing.
Yeah, just like, again, one of those things.
The universe
just
allowed it to happen.
Yeah. It just keeps. Now, if I was a musician, I would have still been back trying to figure out how to play F sharp on the guitar, or there was never the arrow.
Yeah.
But with the art, these things just kept happening.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, and it makes sense. It kind of checks all the boxes, and that when she said that, and of course, my niece, I'm so lame sometimes, told me how to screen save back in those days. I don't screen save? What's this?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then the image would appear on your phone in a grid, and it was organized. I said, this is, because I had stopped taking pictures because this analog shit, they got rid of slides. I only photographed with slides. Slides was my go-to because it didn't take up any room. You didn't have to print a slide. It was both a positive and a negative. It's very convenient. So when they got rid of that, I just dropped, I kind of I did the Upstate thing. I took, and the digital, I couldn't move into the digital camera world.
Yeah.
This was too weird for me.
Yeah.
But when she showed me the screen save, it just opened up a whole new, what I call post-place, meaning I can be anywhere and make art at any time under any circumstances. Yeah. And I'm not on social media much anymore, but when I did her portrait, then it started, okay, what is my contribution in terms of and I realized it was the comments underneath.
So you would just write a comment?
And so I started basically not psychic jujitsu or kind of Joycean riffs, but I would do this kind of what I call bird talk.
What would be an example?
Just crazy sentences that I would make up that made no sense. Most of the time I would sit with the portrait and I'd be watching TV and I'd wait for the ads, and the ads would say something and I'd write it down because it would make no sense at all.
Unrelated.
Totally unrelated to the image. Most of them were in the beginning because the logarithm would change sometimes, and I was allowed to maybe make a sentence or really quick. It's almost kind of jazz sentence.
Would you make a sentence and then take a screenshot right away? Because otherwise it would move down the feed, right?
But I figured out how to get rid of, that was the other thing. I figured out how to get rid of all their comments so mine would move up.
How?
I don't know how. I can't, to this day, I don't know how
But you knew how at that time you could make it happen.
I figured it out, and I don't know if you can do that anymore. I'm not sure. What I was afraid of, which I didn't know at the time, were they also losing it on their feed?
I see.
But they weren't. It was only on my feed.
Oh, great.
Then what I would do is I would look at their comments, and sometimes I would keep a really interesting comment.
Along next to yours?
Along next to mine. But mine would always be the bottom one.
I see.
And mine would be the last sentence. Some of them, when I look back at them, I had to be convinced to show these images,
After the first one, did you think, okay, I'm off and running, I'm going to do a bunch of them now?
I did a whole bunch.
Yeah.
And, again, I did my friends. I went on whoever had a feed.
Yeah.
I did my friends. I did people I didn't know.
Yeah.
I did people that maybe I would want to know. I did people that, it's hard to explain why I would pick someone like the very first, how did the people show up in that very first show? Why those people?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them were my friends, some that I knew, But mostly it was about the way their portraits appeared. To me, they would only appear that way because they were on Instagram. For some reason, it was a very strange way they would show up.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes with friends, or whatever. And it was all about, maybe it was this
The
distance
selfie.
thing.
Yeah.
It was a very different looking type of portrait just to begin with,
Yes.
regardless of what I did with it.
Yes.
And my transfer was simply, you know, I had the option of making it into a photograph, but I decided on, there was a very new type of canvas that had just come out, very white and very tightly wound. And when I saw that reproduced, and I saw how the ink fused with the canvas.
Is it like a laser print?
No, it was just an inkjet.
Inkjet.
Yeah, inkjet had started to become almost ubiquitous.
How big were the images?
The first size, I think, was like 48 wide and maybe 54 inches tall. And now, of course, I can make them tall. And I
You
can,
still make them?
not so much anymore, but I did a book recently called New Painting, where I took images of just people painting with their backs to their painting. A lot of women, some men, and just, you know, at some point, like 5 or 6 years ago, there was just so many people painting, it seemed to me. Like, I just needed to capture that, that idea. And everybody was painting the same painting, it seemed. So I started doing that. We published a book.
Again, 300 copies?
Yeah, something
Are
like
all
that.
the books like that?
Yeah, sometimes there are 1,000. Sometimes they never go into. I don't think they've ever gone into a second printing. I've never done that. But no, they're very small edition. I like that. You
Yeah.
know? But the Instagram portraits got, immediately there was tension and there was crying by my kids. They got hammered at school. I mean, it came out. It became a thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite understand it.
Did people not like it?
Oh, the hate was unbelievable. Oh my God. And then the money,
Yeah.
right, became a factor. And of course, then the people in
Well,
the
the fact
picture.
that you were selling them for a lot of money because they were desirable, collectible things,
And
art,
the
fine art.
people in them
Yeah.
who had no idea that they were in them
No.
and had heard about how much
They were selling for.
I got that. It blew up into a shitstorm. It really became an issue. The way I describe my before and after is that before I owned half a stereo.
Yeah.
No one would sue me.
Yeah.
I could do anything the fuck I wanted.
Yeah.
Nobody was looking.
No.
In some ways, the before was great because I was
You were
so
anonymous.
used to just doing my thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't care.
Yeah. And if
You
people
know?
didn't like it, it was okay.
It doesn't matter. I mean, I was just going to do it regardless because there was no
repercussions.
nothing.
Yeah.
Even when I did my own crazy gallery with the Brooke Shields portrait, that was kind of cloak and dagger stuff. That was kind of fun, Lower East Side. I called it even Lower Manhattan. It was really, Rivington back then was really bad neighborhood.
Yeah.
And to go to that gallery,
Yeah.
which was sometimes open, sometimes not open.
Yeah.
Who's behind this gallery? I had a beard. This woman, you know, supposedly running it.
Amazing.
But in those days, the idea of like being sued, it would never occur to me. I mean, who I didn't know. I didn't have any.
Why would anybody care?
No.
Yeah.
Right. But then the money thing, that's the only reason why there's litigation in the first place.
Yeah. Forgetting the litigation for a minute, you put up a show, everybody's talking about it, people hate it. How are you feeling?
I got mad and really pissed off and went to the gallery. And 3 days before the show was supposed to come down, I took the show down myself because I was really pissed that they didn't say extended for another 2 weeks. And I left the gallery.
Yeah.
I left
Yeah.
Gagosian that day.
Wow.
I was so pissed off
Wow.
that they didn't see that
something was happening.
Let it happen.
Yeah.
Let it.
Yeah.
Because first of all, I didn't ask to show these. I never asked. They asked me.
Yes.
I didn't ask you.
Yeah.
I never ask anything from a gallery.
But if it's a hit.
But I never had a hit.
Yeah.
I never had this much reaction and this much drama.
Yeah.
And the
Why do you
vitriol.
think they wanted to take it down?
I don't think it wasn't Larry. It was the people who worked under him. And I think, I don't want to even, I kind of know why, but I think there was some, you know, it wasn't about a scheduling thing. They could have extended it.
Yeah.
But when I heard that there was no, I walked in with a video and I had 2 assistants and we just,
Amazing.
and the gallery assistant
Yeah.
came running down.
Yeah.
What are you doing? What's going on? And I wouldn't speak. And
Great.
I just took them.
What a great story.
And
And you filmed it.
We filmed it.
Amazing.
Yeah. And they had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
And I just took them off
And
the
were
wall.
they already sold?
They all sold.
They all sold, but you took them back.
I don't know what we did. I
I'm
don't know
sure
how we
eventually
did.
the people got them.
Yeah, people got them.
Yeah.
But I took them.
But you didn't want them to show it anymore because they weren't being
3
respectful
days.
of
It was.
it.
All, yeah. Well, I'm not even sure that they knew what was going on.
Yeah.
I knew. They knew what was going on.
Yeah.
I'm sure if I had talked to Larry,
Yeah.
which I wasn't really in communication that much. But I didn't want to ask
No.
because I don't want to be beholden. I don't want to owe
course.
anybody
Of course.
anything at all, ever.
I understand.
So I just thought, rather than wait for it to be over, I want it to be over on my terms.
Yes.
But what was so strange is that we kind of made up, and 3 months after that, they did I think it was the Frieze Art Fair in New York. They did the whole booth, and that created an even bigger shitstorm because the price had tripled, and that's what caused.
And it was Instagram again,
and
backed by popular demand.
and it really looked, actually, in a art fair setting, it
Yeah.
looked good.
Even
They
more
looked
radical.
good
Yeah, yeah.
on a wall for some reason. I wasn't convinced. I had to be convinced to show them at all. But the minute we hung them in this particular gallery that was in the back of a bookstore on the ground floor of Madison Avenue, there was something about the reflection, the scale of, you had to walk through a bookstore.
Yeah.
So there was already text and images.
Yeah.
So it was a very seamless trip into the next room, and it made sense.
Yeah.
And they kind of wallpapered the room.
Great.
And I do, when you said collector, I do have one collector that I love and revere. Irving Blum. If you go to his apartment in Los Angeles, he has 20 of these things hanging in his house.
Wow.
And for him, I've interviewed him, I've videotaped him, I've talked to him, been a friend of his for quite some time. And to me, he's not just a collector.
Yeah.
He's at a different level
Yeah.
in terms of, you walk in, it's a different curation.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was the one, he pissed a lot of the California artists off, but that soup can show, it's almost like there's another side to that coin where if an artist does something that's, say 62, and you walk into an artist's, well, he didn't have a studio at a townhouse, and there leaning against the wall is a painting of a soup can in 1962 or 61, this high, and there are several of them. They're all different flavors. You have to, what you got me uptown. First of all,
It's insulting.
It's almost like, what are you?
Yeah.
Why are you so the other side of that is someone reception. It's not a compliment. It's almost like it's almost a way of completion.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't. Yeah, there's the soup cans and they're leaning against the wall, but it wasn't completed until Irving came along and decided, I want to show these.
Yeah.
He had to have as big a perspective as Warhol had to, because he brought them to California. Not only did he show them on a shelf.
It's a great idea. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And he sold the story that Irving tells is Dennis Hopper bought 2. Mm-hmm. I thought he only bought 1, but Irving said he bought 2. And that was it. And then Irving realized at the end of the show that they should all be together. He called up Dennis, who luckily I got to meet just before he passed away.
Yeah.
Called him up. Dennis agreed. And then Irving called Andy up and said, I want to buy them all. Would you take $60 a month for the next couple of?
Yeah.
And Andy said, that was like that kind of money, that kind of terms.
Yeah.
And that started his relationship with Warhol. And then the next show he did out was the Silver Elvises.
Amazing. Which
Warhol just sent out on a huge roll. And Irving says, oh, Andy, what am I supposed to? He says, oh, just cut them up. That's why there's singles, some doubles, and threes, because Irving cut them.
Unbelievable.
I mean, stories like that
make
me feel so good about what I do and what I could possibly do.
Yeah.
And to get back to that Time Life building, what else I discovered long after I left was, which is unbelievable, is that Warhol's Empire, the film, was shot from an office building in the Time Life building, which and that was an overnight thing.
Yeah.
Someone had to have some kind of weird permission to get into that building. I wish I had known that at the time. I would have loved to have gone to that office building, that office, and look out. Like, where did they shoot that? Because for me, I've always said I want to make a movie. People say, well, why didn't you make it? I said, well, I'm not going to make a movie until I can make something as interesting as Empire.
Yeah.
So, again, full circle now.
Yeah.
I have made a movie. It's 6 hours and 47 minutes. It's called Deposition.
What's it of?
It's my deposition from my
for the Instagram case.
Yeah.
Because I don't know anything about the lawsuit.
Okay, so I got sued, but I knew
by one of the two of the people in the
show. And I had already been sued. I had taken some pictures of Rastafarians and made them into paintings years ago. Bought a book of Rastas in St. Bart and lived with the book for 3 or 4 years and drew in it and cut it out and didn't pay any attention to the author. I didn't know who the author was. I just liked the images, but he sued me, which in hindsight, he should have. I mean, I should have asked. I could have easily avoided. But I didn't think that way. I didn't think about asking permission. I never have. I didn't think that's part of making art.
The problem with asking permission is they could say no, and then you don't get to make your art, and that's no fun.
Oh, I would have done that anyway, though, even if they said no.
Yeah.
It's like the building inspector.
Yeah.
But anyway, knowing what I knew from the first lawsuit, I knew from the second that when you give a deposition, you get videoed. And so I knew, I'm not even sure if I can even, it's still cool to say stuff like this, I don't know, because we settled finally. Mm-hmm. I had it.
Yeah.
this past. It had taken a toll on me. 8 years.
Yeah.
Takes a toll.
Yeah. It's no
Just
fun.
mentally, it's horrible. But on the back of my mind, I said, I'm going to have this video. Because when I went in, I knew I was going to be videoed.
Yeah.
And I knew it was a bit of a performance.
Yeah.
I guess I can say that.
I think you can.
You're supposed to tell, I did tell the truth.
Of course. And you could
But
tell the truth and
I
do a
knew
performance.
that you're supposed to look straight at the videographer.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to look left or right. That's what the lawyers say. And when the lawyer asks you a question, you answer. But at times, I would answer their question and take up to 15 minutes. And there came a point in the deposition where the lawyer stood up, screamed, "Would you tell your client to stop this talking?" And then, of course, I shut down and just looked straight. It's in my deposition. And you hear them arguing.
Yeah.
I like the idea you can walk in at any time if it's shown.
Yeah.
And it's just me talking about art.
Yeah.
That's it. And I think as a movie, we're planning on showing it soon in Rome, of all places, in this
Great.
little chapel
Great.
that a friend of mine,
Do you know when?
I think Easter. We were going to call it Deposition Row because there's a mention. They were trolling me before I did something about Dylan and Desolation Row, and I said Deposition Row.
Yeah.
I said, in a couple of days, I'm going to go and I'm going to be in Deposition Row. And they wanted to know what I meant by that. So I started, but I think it's cleaner just to call it Deposition.
Both are good.
Yeah,
Both are good.
we'll see. I don't know. There was talk we were going to screen it at the Metrograph about a year ago. I decided, I don't know. I like the idea of doing it
Yeah. No, for sure.
way away,
Yes, yes.
on a little box.
Yeah. Great.
I think we've cleared all the legal hurdles because depositions are public. My first depositions, people published them, so. But I never saw that coming.
Yeah.
That's the other thing about where does this go? And so, I get to have a movie.
That's great.
Finally.
Yeah.
And people can stop asking me when I'm going to make a movie. And, because the idea of making a movie to me is so collaborative, and I don't think I could do that. So.
How is it different when there's someone there? What do you think?
Well, it's a lot. When someone is with me, the last time I had real assistance, I had a studio in Harlem. I had it for about 7 years, just before COVID hit. And the great thing about having, it depends obviously what you're making too.
Yeah.
But I was making paintings.
Yeah.
And the great thing is you can make a mess and you don't have to clean it up. That's the advantage. And it sounds stupid, but it's really like, you don't have to clean your own brushes, and you don't have to, it's all prep work.
Yeah.
But, and my idea about making art has always been, I never wanted it to be a job.
Mm-hmm.
Once it becomes labor, I get so detached and bored, and I want to move on to the next body of work or another process, because I have no desire to work for a living, basically.
I
I never
understand.
have.
Yeah. Do you think you can get to the point where just having the idea is enough and you don't even have to make it?
That too. You can, file it away in your head and live with it in your head.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting point, especially with our experiences in our lifetimes, I think, because of the histories of what we've done. I think we can actually sort of do that now because I know that I've become more patient. I don't have to rush. I don't have to like make a painting. And you're right. Sometimes
I'm just
it
wondering
can
where the line
just,
is, you know, where
why do you have to necessarily,
actually, why bring it into the
yeah,
world?
right.
It's still
here.
it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess the benefit of bringing it into the world is that then you can share it with someone else. And I don't think there's any way to do it otherwise.
Yeah, or you can just share it with your one friend or even share it with yourself. Just to, I mean, I make a lot of things that I need to make just to see what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
And then most of the time, for a long time now, I'm at least able to make things and put them away for years. Like the work that I'm showing in Marfa, I mean, it's been in the racks for maybe almost 15 years. And I said, let's bring, I have a winter, I call my winter studio Upstate. I very rarely go up there anymore.
You used to live there pretty full time, no?
I lived there full time. I left New York for a little while.
How many years?
I left 95, and I met my wife up there, and we had kids, and I found it exotic. I found it strange. I'd never been out of the city.
Yeah.
I found it bizarre.
Where'd you grow up? Well,
I grew up outside of Boston in a suburb. I mean, it was funny too because Panama is now in the news, and that's where I was born. I was born in the canal
How did
zone.
it come up for you to be born in Panama?
Oh, my father worked for the government, and so did my mother.
What did they do? Do you know what they did?
To tell you the truth, I knew what my mother did. She worked for the OSS, which was pre-CIA.
Yeah.
That she told me. But my father, I was never very close to them, but I was never very close to him. But he was a nice guy, but he was just, I never really knew what he did.
Yeah.
But that's how I came to be. He was stationed there. So we moved around a lot.
You have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister. And
older or younger?
A little older, a couple of years.
How's your relationship with her?
I haven't talked to her in a long, long time, but she's very important to me because she introduced me to cultural things. At the time, she was a couple of years older than me and would introduce me to things that, like say I was in the 8th grade, she was a sophomore in high school or something, and all of a sudden I'd get turned on to her. But anyway, the Upstate thing, I think it was for on and off for about 7 years, and then we moved back.
Yeah.
I have a body shop where we make, when I wanted to paint, I wanted to paint something that was already painted. I wanted to move on from the rephotograph. And I always liked the certain way that cars were painted by teenagers, where they would metal flake, stripe, put a flame, mostly Bondo. They would put 9 coats but they would leave the hood completely Bondo. And I would see that on the street, and I said, that
cool.
looks great.
Why is Bondo so good looking?
Yeah,
what is it?
It's just great.
Why?
I don't know,
Yeah,
but it is.
It is. And everyone knows it. It's like, why aren't all cars Bondo?
Well, I set up a shop. After I moved on from Time Life, I moved to California for a little while, and I discovered lifestyle magazines. And
like Sunset Magazine,
surf, biker, heavy metal. Yeah. Even it seemed like in these giant magazine stands. I was just mad for magazines after
Me
Time
too.
Life. I love
magazines too.
But I noticed in the car magazines in the back, there were advertisements for car parts, or you could send away for a particular part. And I was very interested in, the biggest part was the hood at the time. There was this company in California, and, for not so much money, and the idea that you could send away for it and it would arrive in the mail. It's like saving up your box tops.
It's so
And
funny.
you could order a specific one.
Well, of course, because everyone else was buying it to fit the car they had.
But I was buying it because it had a certain kind of like subtext.
Yeah.
Like a 1968 Dodge Challenger was in Bullet. That's what the bad guys drove. Or a 1970 Dodge Challenger was in Vanishing Point. That's what Barry Newman drove. So even if nobody got the painting, the people who picked up the work, the shippers they would go crazy. They didn't know anything about art, but they knew about what a Challenger was.
Yeah.
And I just love that.
Yeah.
I just love the connection I made with that side of the art. It had nothing to do with painting at that point. It just had to do with, they knew.
Yeah. The
They
thing you
knew what
chose to
was just-
paint, it was almost like a secret language going on beneath the surface.
It's the Mason's handshake.
Insiders.
Inside World.
Yeah.
Which is a publication I published once. This called Inside. It's just basically it's a way of talking culturally about what you share and what you know.
And you might not even know necessarily why something is cool, but you know it's cool, and you know the other people who know it's cool know it's cool.
And then they add on even something you didn't even know about.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And so it's
a whole additional conversation going on.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I think it was 2 years ago we had a show of the hoods. They never went over very well. People still didn't quite get them.
Yeah.
But I started, painting them at first with very specific car colors that came out of the factories. And again, just more nonfiction to them as much as I could. And then when I moved upstate, I built a proper body shop, hired some real motorheads, and we went to town. So I'm just saying this idea of luck or juxtaposition, or when you walk into the studio and something happens, like we basically had a junkyard at some point, hundreds of cars. And one day I walked in and there were these 4 doors that were leaning up against the wall. And I looked at them. I said, oh, that's the doors. I said, don't throw those away. Let's weld them together in a row. And the Chevy Impala is going to be Jim Morrison. The other 3, I'm not sure what car they came out of. But that day, walking into the studio, that kind of experience for me is what it's all about. Okay, I got it that day.
Yeah.
Right. And it was so
But it's happening every day. It's always happening.
It's so dumb. It was so kind of not moronic, but for a couple of years I've been walking around this stuff and I never made the connection.
Yeah.
When do you make the connection?
When did you make the Jim Morrison connection? I don't understand that one myself.
Well, I just, it was just the 4, I looked out and there were the 4 doors.
Oh, the 4 doors.
And I call them the doors.
I see.
And I said, that's the piece.
I see.
And
it's the doors.
We welded them together. We did one going right and we did one going left. And I started then I got obsessed with doors. But anyway, those are the kinds of things that wouldn't happen with me with the guitar.
Yeah.
That obviously it happens with people who play the guitar.
Yeah. A discovery happens.
But
a realization.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I played in a band, the Glenn Branca band. Everybody played with Glenn Branca, every artist I know. He would come over to your apartment and say, this is what you hit one note, and as long as you can do this.
Yeah.
And he had 7 guitarists on the stage. And I remember one night we opened Irving Plaza.
Great.
Laurie Anderson was on the bill. This was about maybe the 4th or 5th time I played in public with Glenn. Glenn was, very serious. He really took his, it was his way or the highway, And I had brought along a friend who was a real rock and roller to fill out the guitar, And that evening, something happened on stage where I looked at my rock and roller friend and he looked at me, and something was happening with the sound. And we both recognized, we came off stage and said, should we tell Glenn what we just thought we heard? And I said, he doesn't want to hear that. He wants to be full of glass. He wants to be,
Yeah.
you know, he wants to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
He doesn't want any kind of like references to rock and roll or anything like that. But what was interesting, I just heard a new kind of rock and roll.
Yeah.
I thought.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to say anything to him.
Do you remember the name of the piece? Because I want
don't
to see if we
remember.
can find it.
I don't remember the name. All I remember is that I quit that night because I couldn't talk to the guy.
Yeah.
Because the next day, who joins the band is Thurston Moore and Lee
Amazing.
Ronaldo. And I've asked Lee, hey, I know they probably didn't stay for so long, but they did hear something. And then, of course, they turned it into Sonic Youth.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened.
So Sonic Youth was an outgrowth of Glenn Branca's
I
band.
think that's probably because I was hanging around with Kim.
Take a look, see if any of these songs look like the song, just because I'd love to listen to a...
I haven't listened to Glenn in
His records were put out by 99 Records. That was the way that I learned
maybe
about...
The Ascension.
Let's listen.
I think Lee and Thurston kind of came along. I feel it just,
Grew out of that.
is there a way of Richard Prince Loud song?
Let's see.
It's the only song I've put out in my life.
Let's see.
This is the only song that I've ever done that I like.
Tell me the story of that. How did that
Well,
come to exist?
I had a very strange interlude where I was, do you know that guy named Jeff Aroff?
Yeah,
Okay.
I know him well.
Kidding.
Yeah.
He's a really good friend of mine.
He's
I
great.
love Jeff. He gave me access to Warner Brothers publicity pictures when he
Yeah.
knew I loved publicity pictures. I could just go through them and take what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But he also knew that I was kind of a wannabe songwriter, and my goal was to try to write a hit song. That was so stupid. And so he brought me out to California, and he put me together with some of the session guys from the Beach Boys. And it was a complete nutty thing to do. You know, sometimes I would hear these melodies in my head, but I could just, again, I'd hit a wall.
Yeah.
But anyway, I would go back to my bedroom. What I wanted to do was just record my own stuff in my bedroom
Mm-hmm.
on my own. So I had 2 cassettes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I had a keyboard, and I would just play the keyboard and record it on one cassette. And then I would play what I had recorded on the cassette and play more keyboard, but record it on the second cassette.
Great.
And then I would just go back and forth.
Yeah.
And I came up with this thing, and when I heard it, I just said, that's it. This was 1985. I'm not going to do anything more.
Yeah.
I don't want to do anything more in
Yeah.
music, and I told Jeff that. I'm not going to, nothing's going to ever happen, but I kept that. I just thought it was loud.
Yeah.
You
It
know?
also sounds spiritual. It
Yeah,
sounds like maybe church music.
Yeah, it just happened.
Yeah. Were you
You
playing
know-
it loud in the room when you were playing it?
Not really. I don't know.
Because it sounds loud.
It sounds loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound loud.
Maybe it has to do with the cassette recorder's compression or something that makes it sound loud.
I have no idea, but it had always existed on a cassette.
Mm.
And and over the years, of course, I've met thousands of really well-known musicians. I love speaking, to musicians, and I've had the opportunity to actually sit down, and they want to talk about art.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about music.
Yeah.
And everybody's an artist. But that's fine. I'll look at, whether it's Ronnie Wood or Johnny Depp or, Paul McCartney,
Yeah.
or, Dylan. I think Dylan, to me, is the more accomplished artist, I think. I got a call one day from his manager, this was years ago. Would you want to meet? Bob wants to meet you. I said, what are you, nuts? Is this some sort of like joke?
Frank?
He says, yeah. He says, no, he wants to meet you. And I said, God, yeah, fine. So this short story was that he was playing at the Beacon, and as he does usually in New York, he says he's out in New Jersey. You go to stay at this motel out in Jersey. I said, all right, that's where I go. He says, yeah, that's where you go. And so I go out there and I pull into this like ratty old motel, and I go into the lobby, and there's one of his handlers there, and I figured I'm going to go up to a room. He says, no, he's out in the parking lot. I said, oh, all right. We walk out in the parking lot, and he's in an RV. That's where he's staying. And it's kind of like, not a very nice looking, it's just a regular beaten up, which he drives. He loves to drive this.
Interesting.
So, I mean, that in itself
Yeah.
was knocked me for a loop. And of course, I'm nervous as hell.
Yeah.
Right?
Bob Dylan.
Bob
Scary,
Dylan.
of course.
Scary.
Yeah.
He wants to talk about these publicity pictures of all the work. I guess he had seen me. I had started working with publicity pictures in the mid-'80s, but then really got into them in the late 90s and started collecting more and just organizing them like memorabilia.
Mhm.
I love the way I would go into a memorabilia store, and and something would be elaborately framed, and there would be a signature. And I just love the formalism of the presentation. You know, you would get this photograph that they would like double matte, but then they were selling the autograph.
Yeah.
You know, and so I kind of wanted to mimic that, and I just had it was just, again, another journey, another body of work. I don't know where it would lead. I don't know.
Got you to Bob Dylan.
But it got me a call from Dylan. And of course, we sat there for like hours.
Yeah.
And he was sort of like scoping out the idea of like what, he did want to talk about the art world and how does it operate. I mean, he had shows of his paintings, and I wasn't aware of his paintings at the time, but I soon, then I visited him again in California. And what I was very impressed was the gates that he makes, these phenomenal. I just think the subject for Dylan, the idea, and he brought me to this, I think it was in Santa Monica, his studio, and all this ironwork that he collects, and he welds, and he makes these gates, and I just thought, first of all, I looked at it and I said, that is great folk art.
Yeah.
The marriage that he made with the subject. The paintings, okay. I wrote about the paintings. I wrote about the fact that it almost seemed like his studio, the term I came up with, witness protection, it had that vibe, like he could just, if he needed to escape out the back door, 5 seconds flat, he could. It wasn't an artist's studio. It was a strange looking studio. But the gate was really phenomenal. Then he did have a couple of shows. I think he had a couple of shows with Gagosian, and I helped out. I didn't really help, but I became friends with his manager, who I used to visit his offices and talk to him about the memorabilia that he was organizing, and the painting. I just was knocked out that, the original painting from music from Big Pink and self-portrait painting was there.
Wow. You could photograph those.
I have done many.
You could rephotograph those.
I've done many variations of those two paintings. But I think, yeah, that's probably the idea of becoming friends or at least not friends, but acquaintances with, a musician like that. Like, I know that I've seen your thing with Paul McCartney, and, Paul and I get together we get together at least once a year for the last, 8 years or whatever. And it gets easier. I get very nervous.
Yeah.
Like, he's a beat, it's like I have this thing where it's like, but this past August, because he likes to come to the studio, he likes to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Because he likes to paint.
Yeah.
He was very good friends with de Kooning, who was one of my favorite artists. And we could really communicate on that level, just visually. And, I know that he just had his photographs shown that he took in '64. He showed them at Brooklyn. But this past visit was really interesting because he played me some of his new music that he was just fooling around with. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, he split and went on this big tour, and I guess it's over now. But to have conversations with artists who have, their feet in maybe a couple of different worlds in the arts, whether it's, maybe they're making movies, but they're playing music too, whether they're painting, and, I kind of like that.
Yeah.
Because one is usually experimental. For the most part, one is really solid. It's what they do for a living, But it's nice to share the studio experience with a musician.
Mm-hmm. Different than sharing it with an artist?
I think so, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're looking at it in ways in which another artist, you know, when I get together with someone like Christopher or something, you know, like I just went to his, he had a show downtown on Wall Street recently, took over a floor, an abandoned office floor, and put his work up. And it was really successful. You know, whether it was the windows looking out, the textures, the leftover, the wires hanging from the ceiling, and it all figured into the work. It was he created an environment, or he took over an existing environment. And I've done this before, and he's known about that.
There was the first house.
The first house I did out in LA was a teardown. We were able to lease it for 3 months. That was an incredibly fun, and I met a lot of artists who, because I stayed for 3 months in LA to do the project. And it wasn't in a gallery. You know, I treated the house like a domestic environment.
How did you get the idea to do that?
I just like the idea of showing work in a domestic, with furniture, with the idea of showing hanging a work in a kid's bedroom.
Yeah.
The idea of having outdoor space, like a garage or a driveway, or park a car.
Yeah.
And then tearing the house apart. And then sheetrock. I loved sheetrock like Bondo.
Yeah.
You know, for some reason, I love the idea of sheetrocking, taping, but don't paint it. Leave the tape.
Yeah.
I've done 3 houses. So I did second house, which was up near my property, but that was actually bought by the Guggenheim, the whole place.
Amazing.
There were all hoods in that house. And then it got hit by lightning and burned down.
What are the odds?
What are the odds? But it was like a gift.
But the house was existing.
House was existing in
Abandoned?
a field of grass. It was abandoned. And I'd been driving by it for years. It was just a simple ranch house.
Yeah.
But it was floated in a sea of grass. And I said, I'd love to do something with that house one day.
Yeah.
And one day I saw it was for sale.
Perfect.
The son, I guess the dad had passed away, bought the house, and I just started doing my thing. You know,
Did you put any works in it, or you worked with what was there?
I worked with the rooms, and I worked what was going on the outside. I didn't really change the shape. I didn't change the way you got up to the house, the driveway. I didn't mow the lawn. I parked a car and put it on cinder blocks, because everybody has old cars in there. I basically did what I was introduced to when I first went upstate. Because when I went upstate, as I said, I didn't really know what it was like to live in the country. But I soon realized, there's a basketball hoop in almost everybody's yard. There are these tire planters. And I mean, there was all these kinds of things that I just started treating people's yards as a page in a magazine.
Yeah.
I started photographing people's yards and what was in the yards. And then I got my own yard, that house.
Yeah.
And I treated the house as an Upstate.
Yeah.
And I decided, I put a lot of different things in before I decided, let's just do hoods. And then, I don't know what happened. I'm not sure why it was sold to the Guggenheim. I'm not sure why they bought it, but they did. I think they were trying to go through all the legal things to get it access. So they had to
I see.
they had to deal with parking, handicap. Well, they never got to that stage because they removed all the hoods except one, which was mine. And then my painting, which I did not sell them as part of that, was what I call my Sid Vicious painting, which was this thing I had bought at a Sex Pistol, almost kind of like a shawl, just on cheap fabric that I bought at a flea market. And I stretched it, and I painted everybody out except Sid. I just thought, I liked Sid. I don't know.
Yeah.
I loved his version of My Way.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me was just phenomenal. And I did eventually meet like McLaren, who was a real character. But that burned. When the light, I got a call. House, yeah. I mean, what? But luckily, the only thing in the was the SID and my hood, which was no big deal because I could just repair it. And then I left it there. And I think we renegotiated where I bought the house back from in some weird deal for like $1 or something. And it's the house, and it's now
Still there.
Well, there's very little there. The car's still there.
Yeah.
The 78, a beautiful view. I'm not sure what to do with the property.
But maybe the ruin is the most interesting thing it could be. It's like going to Rome.
It might be. And it's all been, fairly documented.
Yeah.
I published a book called Second House. I mean, and that's the thing about books is they have a way of hanging around. We published 300 copies. I mean, I have my own publishing company, and we published, 300 copies, and we give them away. We just give them a couple of really interesting bookstores who like the books. And
When did you start doing that, the publishing?
Oh, a while ago. It's this company called Fulton Rider. And I just decided, I've never been interested in this idea of the catalog raisonné kind of. I just don't see how that's going to be possible with me. I know people have tried it, and people are trying to do it right now.
You used to make too much stuff.
Well, I just don't see how you're going to organize it. I mean, unless you want like 25 volumes. I mean, I make bodies of work, and I always have.
In a world of artificial highs and harsh stimulants, there is something different, something clean, something precise. Athletic nicotine. Not the primitive products found behind convenience store counters. Not the aggressive buzz that leaves you jittery, but a careful calibration of clean energy and focused clarity. Athletic nicotine. The lowest dose tobacco-free nicotine available. Made entirely in the USA. No artificial sweetener, just pure, purposeful elevation. Athletic nicotine is a performance nootropic. Athletic nicotine is a tool for shifting mindsets. Athletic nicotine is a partner in pursuit of excellence. Slow release, low dose, gradual lift, sustained energy, soft landing, inspired results. Athletic nicotine. More focus, less static. Athletic nicotine. More clarity, less noise. Athletic nicotine. More accuracy, less anxiety. Athletic nicotine. From top athletes pushing their limits to artists pursuing their vision, Athletic nicotine offers the lift you've been looking for. Learn more at athleticnicotine.com/tetra and experience next level performance with Athletic nicotine.
Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.
Do you think of yourself as a curator?
Upstate, I've curated a bunch of buildings. I've built buildings over the past 30 years. It's almost like a little village now. It's almost a mini Marfa. What I'm planning to do is I want to do a show called Collection, where I've taken other artists' work and I've paid homage to them. So in that sense, there's a bit of curating going on. I don't have a space for that show yet, and I don't know when I want to do that show. And what I've done with the homages is, like for the Warhol, it was, to me, it was an interesting Warhol because it belonged to Alice Cooper. It was one of the electric chairs, which of course is interesting because, and we did a trade. And so all I did was I did a zine on the whole thing, him owning it. Shep is in there, his manager, and then every electric chair that's supposedly out there. Because there was some kind of question about this one. but I don't care. It's Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
And I believe he got it from Warhol.
Yeah.
So that is part of the curating. If you were going to say yes, because that's my idea of paying homage. And then I have a Pollock where it's a photograph of him by a very well-known photographer. But I bought a canceled check from Pollock made out to the IRS, but it has his signature.
Yeah.
So that's Pollock. Then de Kooning, I bought one day, I was talking to this, do you know the Minution Gallery?
Yeah.
He's a strange guy. Anyway, he kind of was courting me for a while, but I love his space on the Upper East Side. I lived like 4 doors down from his gallery. It's a beautiful space. Does fantastic shows. Very focused on what I like to focus on, the type of art. So I was up there and he was talking. He wanted to do a show with me, but I just wasn't sure I could do something, work with him. But I'm sitting in his office and he has one of the ugliest de Kooning drawings I've ever seen in my life. Great body, but the face looked like someone drew it, like after. And I said, it's tall, it's big. What's the story with this drawing? He goes, well, I don't know. I said, how much? And I knew exactly. I wanted to buy it, and then I wanted to reproduce the paper, the image, and then I wanted to put my own face in like 15 of them and line them up. So that's the de Kooning. But when you buy these,
Yeah, you could do whatever you want.
you buy the real one.
Yeah.
And mine. You buy the Warhol. You have the Warhol and my zine.
Yes.
And then I got a Picasso from 1948, and I riffed on that. And you buy all 10, but you also at least you get the Picasso.
Yeah.
You know?
That's great.
So the idea is like, I'm going to curate. I would say I'm more of a collector.
Tell me everything you collect.
I collect books. I started, collecting paperbacks in the East Village.
Based on the covers or?
Mostly the beats. I started with, Kerouac and that kind of stuff. And I just learned more. I became friends with people who sold first editions, and I just haunted and hung out. And then I met other book collectors, and I learned, and I went to the antiquarian book fairs, and years and years of just studying and knowing what was going on. And because I didn't start to read until very late. I was very dyslexic. I didn't read until I was like 22. But when I started, it flipped. I just started being able to read.
Yeah.
And I just started reading like everything. But art, sometimes I go through periods where I go kind of crazy and I buy a lot of art. The problem now is we're trying to set up a foundation. In terms of collecting my friends, I'll call them up and I say, hey, where would you like your art to go? Let's say it's the Institute of Chicago or MoCA. It's not as easy as you think. You just can't donate.
Yeah.
It's a whole process, and it's a little defeating. You call them up and you say, hey, I've got,
it's also not what you want to spend your time doing.
No, not at all. But I think it's better than, it's certainly better than selling. But it wasn't making art that really turned me on the most. When I was like 19 or something, I'd just come back from this European humanities thing, which I never attended. It was just part of this thing that I went around to all the museums and I would draw.
How did you get to go on that?
I was at some stupid school that I was avoiding the draft. It was like an alternative hippie school up in Maine. Doesn't even exist. It was like And every loser and person who couldn't take an SAT got, sent there. But they had a humanities course, which was, you would go to France, and sure, I'll go. But I never went to class. I just hung out, and, I would just get on the train. I went to museums all by myself, and, But I came back from that trip, and there was a little carriage house with a little art department at that school. And there was this guy there. He was my only art teacher. But what really turned me on was going to his house when I was 19. He had real art on the wall. And that, I think, that experience actually was incredibly profound for me, because I had never been to a house that had real, he had etchings, he had aquatints, he had dry point, he had painting, had drawings, anywhere like a dry point Matisse to a Mary Cassatt aquatint to this guy named William Bailey, who was a fantastic draftsman and painter taught for years at Yale. This guy Walt Kuhn, who is well known for painting circus. Yeah, he also put together the Armory. He was one of the 3 curators that put together the Armory show where Duchamp and he was the guy who always told me, no, don't settle on any one thing right now.
Yeah.
Don't try to create a style like all the artists that are around our neighborhood in Maine who are trying to get shows and sell their work. And because in those days you were in Wyeth country. I'm a huge Wyeth. I love Andrew Wyeth, huge fan. But there's a lot of other things out there.
Yeah, wasn't your path.
So, and then go to New York. At least check it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And find out what's
good advice
going on. And that was difficult.
Yeah.
I didn't want to leave that bubble. And I was having a great time up in Maine, hanging out with older, working artists.
Yeah.
Going to figure drawing class. I love that.
Yeah.
But the start's really not that different from a lot of other, I think it was getting to New York that the idea of walking down the street in the middle of the afternoon on West Broadway, back then in '74, and being able to pop in to a gallery, One, it's free, doesn't cost anything. Not having to make an appointment, not having to make a plan. Maybe you just went to the bodega to get a sandwich. Oh, I'll just walk in and I see this Art Povera show that I don't really know much about. Or I see a Vito Acconci, who I later become very good friends with. Like, I can't believe I'm friends with this guy years later. But in 1974 go to Sonnabet or Castelli or, it's just not making art. It's the whole.
It's like a community
And then bumping in to another artist and saying, oh, let's grab a coffee and just talk. I think that's, for me, I know it's not for a lot of artists, but for me, that's part of the work.
Yeah.
I loved coming out to LA, and I used to have shows right away in LA. Little, in hotels and crazy, weird places in LA. But the problem with LA is that you just couldn't walk. There's no walking down the street and bumping.
You don't run into anyone.
No.
No.
You want to go see John Baldessari, you got to go all the way to Venice and make an appointment.
Yeah.
Talk to the guy or whatever.
Yeah.
There was no spontaneity that way. And I'm not sure what artists, if that's part of their routine these days.
I know a lot of musicians like that. That sort of the camaraderie of fellow travelers.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do it, it's a different conversation.
Absolutely.
Unless you're doing it, it's like speaking another language.
I think you also break through to places where you wouldn't ordinarily.
Absolutely.
Maybe you'd get there much later.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in Laurel Canyon in 1967. I missed it, though.
Yeah.
I was there.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the wherewithal to stay.
Yeah.
I don't know what would have happened.
Mm.
I was there outside the whiskey when the
Wow.
Doors were playing.
Wow.
I had just gotten out of high school. I was visiting my sister. But that community of musicians up in the hills, and them, I love those docs.
Yeah,
And
it's a
then,
great time in music.
and then them talking about hanging out. I mean, the stories. That kind of time must have been a little bit what I think that I experienced in the early days of Soho.
Yeah.
You know, I got there just in time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost over as soon as I got there, the real estate thing. I mean, it just went. But
That's
I was,
also the luck. You happened to go. You had a guy
Yeah.
who told you to go. You listened. You went. You thought you'd go for 3 months,
yeah,
and you found it.
yeah.
And you persisted through years of rejection.
Well, I thrived.
Years and
but
years.
Yes, but I really thought after a while, if the work wasn't rejected, then I don't know. It's not like I wanted to be rejected.
No. But being hated is better than nobody caring. There's an emotion.
When you get to, it's better to have that extreme, either extreme love or, this guy is just wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know. I still have a very narrow definition or idea of what an artist is, especially these days.
Yeah.
And it's probably not the correct one, but I still think an artist is essentially an antisocial creature who basically just is in a room doing something by themselves. And their audience doesn't really have one at the moment of the making, and probably won't for a while.
Yeah. It's not about them.
No. And
I read a review of one of your shows. The reviewer finished looking at the show and said, "I wish I was dead."
God. You know what? I love.
It's
I
unbelievable.
actually sometimes I used to collect.
It's
those
fantastic.
things, and I'm not sure if I've heard that one.
Yeah,
before,
I
but-
wish I was dead.
Wow. Please kill me.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what's next, but it's.
Are you as excited about making art now as you've ever been?
Yeah, it's all I do.
Yeah.
It's all I think about. I don't really do anything else, and I never have. I mean, like for instance, this is the first time I've actually sat and talked to anybody about what we're talking about in a long, long time. I mean, I gave up giving interviews and talking to the press and whatever for a while ago. I don't know. I just felt this time I thought I'd feel comfortable because you're an artist, and I think I feel more comfortable around people who are creative.
Yeah.
Because they get it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even if explaining stuff. I mean, you get it. You know what it's like. You have to make these decisions, and some of the decisions are made not by you, but for you. They're made kind of automatically, and it's not like magic. I don't know what the word is.
Would you say it's like it's revealed to you?
Revealed? Yeah, something is definitely, but I think it's recognition. You're able to receive it, whereas most of the population, all that got taken away from them by probably around age 6. Somehow the artist, something didn't get removed somehow.
Yeah.
Something happened very young.
Tetragrammaton is a podcast. Tetragrammaton is a website. Tetragrammaton is a whole world of knowledge.
What may fall within the sphere of Tetragrammaton? Counterculture? Tetragrammaton. Sacred geometry? Tetragrammaton. The avant-garde? Tetragrammaton. Generative art? Tetragrammaton. The tarot? Tetragrammaton. Out-of-print music? Tetragrammaton. Biodynamics? Tetragrammaton. Graphic design? Tetragrammaton. Mythology and magic? Tetragrammaton. Obscure film? Tetragrammaton. Beach culture? Tetragrammaton. Esoteric lectures? Tetragrammaton. Off-the-grid living? Tetragrammaton. Alt spirituality? Tetragrammaton. The canon of fine objects? Tetragrammaton. Muscle cars? Tetragrammaton. Ancient wisdom for a new age. Upon entering, experience the artwork of the day. Take a breath and see where you are drawn.
Tetragrammaton.com